Chapter 11 is disorders of white blood cells and lymphoid tissues. These are the developmental stages of blood cells, and it's very important to get a handle on this from the beginning because it will help you understand the terminology. You start off with a pluripotent stem cell. This means this can become any different kind of all these different cells. Then it goes down one of two pathways: lymphoid stem cell or myeloid stem cell. If it's a lymphoid stem cell, it will give rise to these cells here: B cells, which will go on to become plasma cells, T cells, and NK or natural killer cells. So these are lymphocytes. If we go down the myeloid stem cell pathway, we can end up making monocytes, eosinophils, neutrophils, and basophils, which are granulocytes, platelets, and erythrocytes, which are red blood cells. So lymphoid versus myeloid is an important distinction, and the cells that they give rise to are these different groups of cells. So white blood cells are called leukocytes, and that just means leuko is white, cyte is cell. Of the white blood cells, we have granulocytes. Granulocytes have a name that ends in "phil," neutrophil, eosinophil, or basophil, and they get these names based on the stains that are attracted to them when you look at them under the microscope. Neutrophils are the most common, most numerous. They are elevated in a bacterial infection. They're the first on the scene white blood cell. Eosinophils are going to be associated with allergic responses and also parasitic infections. Basophils are going to release heparin and histamine and other inflammatory mediators, in other words, things that cause inflammation. Then we have the lymphocytes, B cells and T cells. B cells will make antibodies. Those are little proteins that stick on the surface of things and mark them for destruction. T cells are involved in what we call cell-mediated immunity. And then we have natural killer cells that will kill antigenic cells. An antigen is something on the surface of something, and it alerts the immune system to the fact that this is something foreign or has been marked as foreign and needs to be destroyed. Then monocytes, which become macrophages when they leave circulation, are antigen-presenting cells. In other words, they phagocytize something, eat it, and then take the contents of that cell and present it. And they are also going to be creating inflammatory mediators. So these are pictures from under a microscope of these different cells. The granulocytes, as we said, will end in phil, neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophil. And then the agranulocytes are the lymphocytes and the monocytes. There's a mnemonic: never let monkeys eat eosinophil, bananas, that has your white blood cells from most common neutrophil to least common basophil. It's a good way of remembering them. Question: which type of leukocyte works the hardest when you receive a vaccination? A vaccination is something where they inject you with something that has antigenic properties. In response to that, you are going to generate antibodies, and the cell that makes antibodies is going to be the B lymphocyte. So just like they're explaining, vaccination introduces antigens. Your body will have a response to that. It'll make antibodies, and B lymphocytes are the cells that make those antibodies. Then it also goes on to mention a little bit about eosinophils and basophils, allergic and immune response. Neutrophils working to fight against infection. Neutrophils are most common, as we said before. Eosinophils are elevated in parasitic infections and allergies, and basophils are going to be secreting heparin and histamine to increase the inflammatory response. So now they're showing you myeloid and lymphoid. This is an important distinction, and the names of these conditions that we have rely upon this differentiation between myeloid and lymphoid. So lymphoid stem cell is going to give rise to lymphocytes. Plasma cells are cells that continue to exist that make antibodies if you come in contact with something that would have made you sick again. And then myeloid, the granular leukocytes, so the ones that end in phil, eosinophil, basophil, and neutrophil. And then monocytes, they come from myeloid stem cells. So that's what they're showing you here, common myeloid stem cells. Committed precursors are going to become something. In other words, they can only become one of these things. You can't go backwards. So platelets, monocytes and granular leukocytes, and erythrocytes. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. Platelets are what help stop bleeding. And then we discussed monocytes and granular leukocytes. Then lymphoid stem cells are going to be producing T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. So here they've just combined those two diagrams to show you the difference. Myeloid goes down this pathway. Lymphoid goes down this pathway and makes lymphocytes and natural killer cells. Question, which type of leukocyte is created in bone marrow? And then they give you a list, but they also give you the possibility of all of the above. The answer, all of the above. Granular leukocytes are created in the bone marrow, so eosinophils, basophils, and neutrophils are all granular leukocytes, and they're all made in the bone marrow. So now we have a scenario. A man has cancer and has been given radiation therapy. Radiation will suppress the bone marrow work of generating red blood cells and white blood cells. So what does his doctor prescribe? Erythropoietin. This stimulates the production of red blood cells. Granulocyte monocyte colony stimulating factor. This is going to encourage the production of the granulocytes and monocytes. And then thrombopoietin is going to be a substance that is going to encourage his body to produce thrombocytes, which thrombocyte is another word for platelet. So the reason they've been prescribed is to encourage the production of these cells. So this is another diagram or another picture of these photomicrographs showing you again neutrophil, eosinophil, and basophil are the granulocytes. Agranulocytes are lymphocytes, monocytes, and then we had B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes specifically within that category. White blood cell deficiencies. Leukopenia, not enough white blood cells. Neutropenia, specifically neutrophils, or a lack of cells with the granular substance in there in the cell, which is all the fills. Aplastic anemia is a failure to make sufficient red blood cells. Infectious mononucleosis and HIV infection are also conditions that will inhibit white blood cells or will destroy white blood cells. So specific to HIV, patients with HIV are immunocompromised. That means their immune systems don't work very well. That means they get sick with things that they would not normally have gotten sick with. Which type of leukocyte is the best indicator of immune function? So they give you some choices: neutrophil, eosinophil, T lymphocyte, and monocyte. And we'll see T lymphocyte. They direct the immune response. So they let us know how the immune system is working, and patients with HIV are treated when their T cell counts drop below a certain amount. And then acquired immune deficiency syndrome arises when their T cell counts drop even lower and they start to get opportunistic infections. In other words, people getting sick with things that they would not normally have gotten sick with, but it's their suppression of their immune system that's caused this. So this is a lymph node, and it's going to have afferent lymphatics that are going to be bringing lymph fluid in, efferent lymphatic that's going to be exiting, so E, exit, leaving, and this lymph fluid is fluid that's come from the tissues that we can do surveillance on. We can look for bacteria, viruses, any kind of cells that shouldn't be there. The immune system will look for it. So this is sort of the workplace for the immune system. And we have something called primary follicle and a secondary follicle. Secondary follicle is when this has been stimulated, and the superficial cortex, cortex means the bark or the outer part of something, is where the B cells are located. Paracortex, a little bit lower in, is where the T cells are located, and this lymph node will have a capsule around it. In a cancerous condition, we'll get expansion or enlargement of these lymph nodes, and they'll be painless. It won't hurt, and they will have a kind of a rubbery consistency. On the other hand, in an infection, we'll get lymph node swelling, but they will be painful. So if your lymph nodes are painful, and in this case it's a good sign since it's less likely to be cancer that's developed at this location and more likely to be an infection. So leukemia, Leuk is white, emia in the blood, malignant neoplasm of hematopoietic stem cell. So what does that mean? Malignant means it's cancer. Neoplasm means it's new growth. Hematopoietic means it's some cell that's in the blood, and it's stem cells. So this means we're getting a mutation and malignancy at the level of the stem cell. So in the bone marrow, creating abnormal white blood cells. And as we saw before, this division between lymphocytic and myelogenous, that at the very beginning where the cells went down those two different pathways, this is the division that we see. So myelocytic, multipotent stem cell, they're showing you half of this. The next slide, they'll show you the other half. So neoplastic myeloid stem cells, neoplastic committed precursors, abnormal monocytes or granular leukocytes, because that's the pathway. Myeloid is the pathway to produce these. So mutation of myeloid cell line, an overproduction of abnormal monocytes or granulocytes. In addition, production of other cell types decreases. We're sending all our energy, nutrients, and all our work down this pathway. So we won't have enough of the other type of cells. Lymphocytic leukemia, we're going down this pathway. The lymphoid stem cells, mutation of lymphoid cell line, overproduction of abnormal immune cells, and in this case, neoplastic B or T lymphocytes or NK natural killer cells. And then again, production of other cell types decreases. See, down this pathway, we're not sending as much stuff down here. And we have abnormal cells here, so the cells we're producing are abnormal or faulty. Leukemia, what is the difference between acute versus chronic and lymphocytic versus myelogenous? So lymphocytic versus myelogenous is what we talked about previously. It's a different cell line and will result in a different kind of overproduction. Acute versus chronic. Acute is something that happens quickly and you become very ill. Chronic can go on for a long time. And if the mutation is early in these undifferentiated cells, that's going to be more likely to be acute. If the mutation comes later in more differentiated cells, it's more likely to be chronic, just like we saw back in the chapter on neoplasia. Here is an example of how one of these things can come about. So on these chromosomes, if we get things moved around, translocated, so that now a gene that will code for something that in excessive amounts will cause a problem is next to an area that tends to be translated frequently, we'll get creation of too much of a particular product. So we had a proto-oncogene that now becomes an oncogene. So we have sort of a hybrid where we've mixed these two things together, and now we're forming something that is going to cause us to have leukemia, in this case myelogenous leukemia, this particular example. Leukemias affect bone marrow activity. How would this cause bone pain and risk of fractures, anemia, thrombocytopenia, and immune suppression? If we think about what the bone marrow should be doing, it should be making red blood cells, it should be making platelets, and it should be making normal white blood cells. In the absence of this, we are going to get anemia, not enough platelets, and difficulties with our immune system. Meanwhile, we are going to be stimulating the production of osteoclasts, which are going to be destroying bone, and we're also being very metabolically active in a way that's not useful for the organism. Lymphomas, so these are arising in the lymph node areas, and there's two different kinds, Hodgkin lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So if we look at Hodgkin's, malignant B cells in the lymphoid organs. Non-Hodgkin's is both B and T cells. So if you had to guess which was worse, non-Hodgkin's is going to be worse because it's B and T cells as opposed to just B cells. Myeloma, so abnormal B cells can form tumors, produce abnormal antibodies. Abnormal antibodies are bad because we need normal antibodies to attach to antigenic surfaces on things to help us destroy foreign things or cells that have become cancerous. Proteins will also increase blood viscosity, will infiltrate the organs, proliferation of osteoclasts like we discussed previously, and bone being broken down. So a lot of times you hear multiple myeloma, and there's a picture in your book of these individuals with difficulties with their bone because of proliferation of osteoclasts. So question, tell whether the following statement is true or false. Hodgkin lymphoma has a better prognosis than non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And the answer should be true because non-Hodgkin's is both B and T. Hodgkin's is B cells, and there's a Reed-Sternberg cell that's specific to it that you can see microscopically. So more immune function is lost in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.